Chapter 1. The Whispered Plan. The first whispers of the plan surfaced in the dead of winter, in the small town of Kearns, Ontario. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling all sound, but behind closed doors, people spoke in hushed tones. Strange things had been happening: unexplained disappearances, erratic utility blackouts, and bizarre health inspections conducted by government agents in biohazard suits. Jack Rivers, a local mechanic and father of two, had always trusted the government. It wasn't until his neighbor, Mr. Langley, disappeared after a supposed emergency health survey that Jack started paying attention. Langley wasn't the kind to leave without notice. His truck was still in the driveway, his lights left on, and his dog tied up outside in the freezing cold. Jack's wife, Emily, dismissed his concerns. "You're just letting those conspiracy theories get to you," she said, turning the TV to drown out his ranting. But Jack couldn't ignore the patterns. One evening, as he worked late in his garage, a black SUV pulled up across the street. Two men in dark suits got out, carrying clipboards. They knocked on the door of the Kowalskis, a quiet elderly couple who rarely left their home. Jack watched, the wrench in his hand forgotten. After about 20 minutes, the men emerged, carrying sealed black cases. The Kowalskis didn't come out. The next morning, their house was empty. No car, no lights, no signs of life. A small yellow notice was taped to the front door, bearing the official seal of the Canadian Ministry of Public Health. The words, "Quarantine enacted," were printed in bold. By the end of the week, 3 more houses on Jack Street had similar notices. The community started to panic, but any attempts to question the authorities were met with vague reassurances. "We're handling a localized health crisis," one spokesperson said during a press conference. "There's no need for alarm." But Jack wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. And he was determined to find out what. Let me know if you'd like me to continue with the next chapters. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Point. Jack's unease grew as more houses were marked with the ominous "Quarantine enacted" notices. He began keeping a journal of the events, detailing the black SUVs, the men in suits, and the families who vanished overnight. Emily continued to wave off his concerns, but even she couldn't deny the eerie silence that had settled over the neighborhood. One cold February morning, Jack decided to investigate. He walked to the Kowalskis' house, its windows dark and lifeless. The yellow notice fluttered in the breeze, and the air carried a faint chemical smell. He reached for the doorknob but stopped when he noticed something odd: a small trail of what looked like ash leading away from the house, toward the woods at the edge of town. Jack followed the trail, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The forest was dense, the trees bare and skeletal against the gray sky. The trail ended abruptly at a clearing, where he found a patch of scorched earth. The snow around it had melted, and the ground was still warm. "What the hell?" Jack whispered. Suddenly, he heard the faint hum of engines. He crouched behind a tree as 3 black SUVs rolled into the clearing. Men in suits stepped out, followed by 2 soldiers in full tactical gear. One of the men carried a clipboard, while the others unloaded what looked like heavy-duty canisters. "Begin deployment," the man with the clipboard said. Jack watched in horror as the soldiers sprayed a thick, yellowish mist over the clearing. Within seconds, the air became acrid, burning his throat even from a distance. He clamped a hand over his mouth and nose, retreating quietly through the woods. Back in his garage, Jack scribbled furiously in his journal. "They're poisoning the area." "Why? What happened to the Kowalskis? To Langley? This isn't a health crisis, it's something else. Something worse." That night, Jack tried to call the local news station, but the line went dead after a few rings. His internet connection, too, seemed unreliable, and any searches about the quarantines led to generic government statements. The next day, a new notice appeared in his mailbox. It bore the same seal as the quarantine notices, but was addressed directly to him. Notice of mandatory health inspection. Report to your local clinic within 48 hours. Jack crumpled the paper, his heart pounding. Whatever was happening, he had no intention of walking into it willingly. Chapter 3. The Underground. Desperation drove Jack to the one person in town who might have answers, Madeline Cho, a former journalist turned recluse. She'd been a thorn in the side of local authorities for years, publishing exposés on government overreach and corruption. Madeline's house was off the grid, hidden deep in the woods. Jack found her sitting on her porch, sipping tea from a chipped mug. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said, motioning for him to sit. Jack explained everything, the SUVs, the quarantines, the clearing in the woods. Madeline listened intently, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You're not the first to notice," she said. "This has been happening in pockets across the country. Isolated towns, vulnerable communities. It's all part of something bigger." "What do you mean?" Jack asked. Madeline pulled out a folder stuffed with clippings, photos, and maps. She pointed to a series of red dots scattered across Canada. "These are all locations where similar quarantines have been reported. And here," she tapped on a satellite image, "are government facilities popping up near every one of them. They're not hospitals, Jack. They're disposal sites." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "Disposal? Of what?" "People," she said bluntly. "They're eliminating undesirables. Older folks, the sick, anyone who doesn't fit their long-term agenda. It's a silent purge, and they're using the guise of public health to cover it up." Jack's stomach turned. "Why isn't anyone doing anything? They've silenced the media, controlled the narrative. Most people don't even realize it's happening." Madeline handed him a burner phone and a flash drive. "On here is everything I've gathered. Evidence, testimonies, proof. If you want to fight back, this is where you start. But be careful. If they know you're onto them, you're as good as gone." Jack left Madeline's house with a heavy heart and a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the risks, but the thought of staying silent while his neighbors vanished was unbearable. Let me know if you'd like me to continue. Chapter 4. The Hunt. Jack spent the next day poring over the files Madeline had given him. The flash drive contained chilling documents, internal government memos referring to population optimization, satellite photos of scorched land near other towns, and even intercepted emails discussing acceptable loss ratios. It was no longer a theory. This was a systematic operation to thin the population under the guise of public health. The burner phone rang, startling Jack. He answered, half expecting it to be Madeline. "Is this Jack Rivers?" a man's voice asked. "Who's asking?" Jack replied cautiously. "We know you've been poking around," the voice said, cold and clipped. "Hand over what you've found, and maybe you'll live to see tomorrow." The line went dead. Jack's blood ran cold. He rushed to the window and saw a black SUV idling at the end of a street. Grabbing the flash drive and his journal, Jack stuffed them into a backpack and bolted out the back door. He didn't have a plan, but staying put was no longer an option. Jack made his way to the outskirts of Kearns, avoiding main roads and sticking to wooded paths. The burner phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "They're watching. Get to Madeline's. Now!" When Jack arrived, Madeline was already packing her things. "They're on to us," she said. "We don't have much time." "How did they find me?" Jack asked, panicked. "They always do," Madeline said grimly. "But we can still get the truth out." She handed him a second flash drive. "This one has the final piece of the puzzle, proof that this goes all the way to the top." We need to get this to someone who can expose it. Before Jack could respond, headlights flooded the windows. They're here, Madeline whispered. Chapter 5. Escaping the Net. The front door burst open, and armed agents stormed in. Madeline shoved Jack toward the back door. Go! I'll hold them off. Jack hesitated, but Madeline pushed him harder. If you don't get this out, none of this will matter. He slipped out the back just as the agents reached the living room. As he ran into the woods, gunshots rang out behind him. Jack's lungs burned as he pushed himself deeper into the forest. He followed a narrow path Madeline had shown him earlier, a route to an abandoned logging road where a contact was waiting. The SUV headlights appeared again, cutting through the darkness. Jack ducked behind a fallen tree, clutching the flash drives like lifelines. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man in a heavy coat, his face obscured by a hood. You Jack? He whispered. Jack nodded. Come with me. The man led Jack to a hidden vehicle, an old truck with mismatched plates. They drove in silence, the forest swallowing the noise of pursuit behind them. Chapter 6. The Broadcast. Jack's contact, a journalist named Elena Cruz, worked out of a makeshift studio in a remote cabin. She was skeptical at first, but became serious when Jack showed her the files. This could change everything, Elena said, her fingers flying over her laptop as she uploaded the data. Jack paced nervously. They'll come after you too. Elena nodded. I know. But if we don't do this, no one will. Hours later, Elena's broadcast went live on a secure network. It wasn't a major news channel, but it was enough to spark attention. She laid everything bare: the government's plan, the disappearances, the cover-ups. Within minutes, the story began trending online. People in towns across Canada started sharing similar experiences. But the victory was short-lived. As Jack and Elena watched the views climb, the cabin's power cut out. They're here, Jack said, his voice trembling. Elena grabbed a small backup drive. We'll go mobile. This isn't over. As they fled into the night, Jack realized that while the government might silence them temporarily, the truth was already out. The spark had been lit, and the fight for survival and justice had just begun. The end.